This is a global skills podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together.
Today's guest is someone who lives at the crossroads of performance, purpose, and possibility. He spent over 2 decades leading at the highest level of global technology, helping shape how innovation, leadership, and skills translate into real economic impact. He's the chair of Skills England, a national body tasked with one of the most complex challenges of our time, aligning skills, jobs, productivity, and people in a rapidly changing world. But what makes today's conversation actually compelling is the human side. Beyond boardrooms and policy papers, he's a competitive endurance athlete, a triathlete who's represented Team GB, someone who understands discipline, resilience, and long-term commitment, not just intellectually, but physically. Awarded a CBE for service for technology and skills, a former long-term leader at Cisco, and a relentless advocate for lifelong learning. Today, we're joined by Phil Smith. Phil, welcome to the Global Skills Podcast.
Thank you very much, and for that very kind introduction, Vanessa. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you. I would really love to start, and I start with many of the guests, just understanding where you're from, where you're connecting in from today, and how you started on the path in tech.
Yeah, well, it's, I guess I would describe it as a relatively unremarkable start in life. I grew up in East Kilbride, which is a new town not far from Glasgow, with father as an engineer, initially a stay-at-home mum, but then I worked in the civil service and the Inland Revenue for a number of years, which was based up in East Kilbride. And I grew up, a very happy childhood. East Kilbride, interesting, is modern. It's a new town, an overspill town. So, of course, it had loads of young families in it, which, of course, I didn't really realize at the time. But, as a result, there was lots of cool stuff going on, which was great as a young person growing up there with lots of friends and lots of things to do, including music and many other things that I got involved in. So, yeah, really good. And then I moved. I didn't really know that west side of Scotland very well because my parents were from Edinburgh. So all my relatives, my grandparents and all that were in Edinburgh. So I was kind of more affiliation to Edinburgh in my early years until I went to Glasgow Uni and did a degree remarkably in microbiology. So absolutely nothing to do with digital, and which is actually quite a good degree because, you can get involved in the brewing industry and the food industry and the water industry and all that. Great for having guest speakers, of course, from Guinness and various other people who brought, barrels of beer along and whatnot, which was quite nice. But yeah, when I finished my degree, I kind of was interested in, I don't know, maybe you get put off by all the hard work you do in getting a degree and saying maybe there's something else out there. And I'd done a tiny bit of statistics and actually a tiny amount of computing, which was obviously very embryonic in the days when I graduated. But then I got an opportunity just randomly for Philips, who were in the next town to me in Hamilton, who were recruiting for people for Philips down in Cambridge. And I went along, did an aptitude test, obviously did okay in the aptitude test, and they offered me a graduate recruitment place down in Philips down in Cambridge. And I ended up being a COBOL programmer. Well, that was my initial training to program in COBOL. I did that, and then I ended up as a well, actually, I sort of fairly shortly moved away from sort of mainstream application programming into system programming, where I was kind of working on the operating system, security, networking, all that kind of stuff, and hence went through to eventually to IBM, then Cisco, and then where I am today. So yeah, interesting time and, lots of good stuff, great memories, and still a bunch of family up in Scotland as well. So.
And you haven't lost the accent?
Not at all. Well, they say you keep your 11-year-old accent unless you really try. And I know that I was certainly still in Scotland as an 11-year-old. And it's funny because what it's like when you work somewhere. I've been working in England and people hear you speaking in a particular way. Some people say, oh, you got a really strong accent. Other people go, are you Scottish? It's like, and it's kind of just because people normalize. I can still remember my son actually when we went along to one of his parents' evening and said, and in his diary, it was like 7 or 8, it said something like, my dad thinks he's got a Scottish accent, but he doesn't. So anyway.
That's pretty
yeah, now growing up, 4 kids, live in Stratford-on-Avon, or just outside Stratford-on-Avon. I've been in this Midlands area actually since I worked for IBM. Well, despite some kind of, moving about international things and so on, I've always stayed here, and I'm still in lovely Stratford area at the moment. So.
A beautiful space. I used to live in Warwickshire for a few years, and it really is a gorgeous place to be. Before we jump into all the current stuff you do, I'm really intrigued about the college choice that you made and then the completely different career path that you do. Because I think for a lot of people right now, and especially I'm hearing from, universities that young people are finding it really hard to get a job. And maybe if they had done coding in university, they think, oh, well, I have to go that path. What helped you make the decision to become, I can't help but say it, Philip Phillips? How did you make that move? Did you have a conversation with someone, or how did
Yeah, it's really interesting, Linda, because, back in the day when I was at university, and I think this is probably true of my generation and maybe even younger generations, is the kind of general expectation is if you went to uni, you got a job. There was the jobs, you were a graduate, you would get a job in a graduate scheme, or you would get a job in, in industry or whatever. And that was probably broadly true. And certainly a lot of statistics say, people who get degrees went on to earn higher wages and so on than others. But I think it was generally the case, which is that people who got a degree, because, at that time we were kind of moving in from the world where people were starting to go to uni who, in families, no one had ever been to uni before. And that was true of my family. Not that it was a big thing, but it was just, I went on to uni and it was kind of the thing you did after school. And I wasn't really that worried about getting a job. And when I left, and I didn't even spend a lot of time, as a lot of people did at uni, going on to the milk round and so on, and really looking for things while I was there. I kind of said, I'm just going to concentrate, get my degree, and then I'll worry about getting a job afterwards. And honestly, it was sort of pretty random. I bumped into someone who said, oh, yeah, I think it was at the time there was a sort of government recruitment agency called Professional Executive Recruitment, PR, I think it was called from memory, who were kind of advertising jobs. I think I signed up with them and they said, there's these, graduate recruitment jobs for Philips. And I said, sounds quite interesting. Philips, I know Philips, interesting company. At the time, Philips was the biggest private employer in Europe at the time. 50,000 people worked for Philips, and they owned Polydor Records and Gola footwear and obviously the electronics brands that they had. It was quite, I mean, I didn't know a lot about it, but I went along for the interview. They offered me a job, sounded like good down in Cambridge. Why not, So it wasn't particularly cleverly thought out. And I do think it's a very different world. I'm sure we're going to talk about this, but, the idea now that, young people come out of university and there's an automatic job there, it's not an automatic thing. And we've got a big mismatch of people who are over and underqualified for jobs relative to the positions they have. So people leaving with degrees or masters or even PhDs and ending up working in supermarkets on checkouts because, the degree they've got or the set of skills they've got isn't relevant for the jobs that people are trying to recruit for. So I think that automatic divide is definitely gone, and hence obviously the bigger push now into sort of vocational learning, other ways of engaging. But I think there's still a big hangover of, it's all about getting degrees, and it's clearly not in the modern world.
Well, let's jump into today and where we're at in the role that you're in. But perhaps to start off, just for the sake of the listeners, understanding what is the goal of Skills England? What does and will Skills England do in the years to come?
So Skills England was announced by the Prime Minister back in July, not last year, the year before. So when they came to power, shortly after that, he announced that, and I think it had been some work that had been done by the Labour Party out of government, said, skills system's a mess. Discussion you and I have had a lot, Vanessa, which is that it doesn't match the requirement of society or the nation or the economy at the moment. And we need to and he said it's a mess and we need to fix it. And hence we're creating a body called Skills England, which will help to act as an authoritative voice and shape the system to what it needs to be. Now, the reality is Skills England doesn't have all the levers to do that, but it has a kind of mandate that says, you're there to act as this authoritative voice and enabler to try and shape the skills system to something that is needed. And, that's if we think of that, the fact that when something's a mess doesn't mean it's all broken. It just means it's incredibly badly put together. And that, the things you and I have talked about many times of, the demands that people have for jobs, and then the supply doesn't match that demand. Or you've got, I mean, again, I've said it many times publicly, but I think it's worth restating, there's this sort of general sense as I came in of business and others saying, we're not getting the right people, they don't have the right skills, they're not suitably qualified, they're not job ready, all those kind of narrative. And then there's the sort of system, education system, skill system going, yeah, but we're creating all these amazing things like apprenticeships and boot camps, and why are you not using them? Why are you not giving us job placements? And there's a sort of dialogue going on like this where people are, shouting at one side and somebody else. And the truth is, like every dialogue, and you learn this as a leader over many years or even as a parent, there's two sides, but there's usually three. There's two sides opposing, but there's actually a third answer. And of course, there's realities, there's truth. There is a problem with some people coming through who don't have the right skills. There's definitely a problem that, we're not getting the amount of business engagement we need. But how do we fix it? So Skills England's job, I think, is to say, okay, get all that. How do we fix it? What is it we need to do? Do we make it change the language, change the supply, change the demand, change the narrative? What is it we need to do to make the skills system suitable for the demands we have of the nation, which are for growth, for inclusiveness, for opportunity, to allow us to get to somewhere where people can get useful jobs, high value jobs, high productivity jobs, and so on.
It's music to my ears, as you know, for years and years. Actually, prior to Skills, I used to be really supporting the idea of regional working through remote working, and how can we open up the doors for anyone. I say the underrepresented, and I don't mean just the unemployed, but people returning to work, parents, people with disabilities. How do we make it more of a level playing field? And what do you think now with the evolution of AI, the formation of Skills England, and I guess there's money coming through government, not just in England, but with the formation of the Union of Skills, we will now have funds we can access. What do you think it looks like the future in the coming years once we've sort of worked through the mess?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Vanessa, because the reality is it's not straightforward, is it? There are there's lots of stuff already out there. I mean, there's tons of really good skill stuff happening in the system. There's private sector things from all the big tech companies, from individual retailers, etc. There's amazing work both in if I take it Procure in the UK, the sort of stuff that's happening in skills boot camps and apprenticeships, and obviously universities and so on and so on. So there's lots of amazing stuff going on, but it's incredibly hard to navigate and engage with. So partly of the future really says, well, how do we get it to the stage where it's better navigated? And so one of the things that I'm certainly pushing Skills England, the board and the executive to do, is to simplify things, to make things easier to navigate. I mean, how do you navigate a system that's unbelievably complicated? If you're in the inside, it's fine. You're an expert, you're a big company, you've got people who are experts on apprenticeship, experts on getting funding, whatever it might be. But if you're a smaller business or even an individual, particularly a small business, they kind of want to upskill, but they look at the system and think, oh my God, it's just too hard, too complicated. I don't know where to engage. There's all these different, I hear there's funds and stuff available, but how do I do that? Do you have to apply for it? Is there big forms to fill in? How do you scrutinize it? Can I afford the additional cost of maybe bringing a young apprentice on and whatnot? So I think if I was really looking forward, and as you say, you've then got the dynamics of global uncertainty and AI and technology and so on. So there's a sort of real mix of things going on at the moment, much of which you could see as a challenge, but also we can see a lot of as an opportunity as well, which is that we have to rethink the way we're doing things. We have to use technology to try and enable things, and we have to prepare the nation, in the parochial case of the UK as well, to be confident in digital and in AI and in other skills as well. And I think if we could create a digitally confident nation, that would be great as far as I'm concerned. And if that confidence then plays into people's ability to use technology better in their life, in their jobs, and obviously in the more advanced side where people are, driving the technology forward, that'd be super powerful. But it requires a real alignment. It requires saying, well, what is it we really try to do? And then saying, okay, how does the system, in the broadest sense, private, public, and other, fit together to actually deliver that?
Quick question. Do you actually know what skills exist across your organisations today? Or are decisions still being made on job titles, CVs and assumptions around who can be reskilled and upskilled? You see, as AI reshapes work and organisations really face that pressure to cut costs, the real challenge isn't just skills gaps, it's understanding which skills are transferable and which can be redeployed into the future with a bit of upskilling. So, for the listeners of Global Skills Podcast, Abodu, our sponsor, has created this free Skills AI readiness assessment. It gives leaders clarity in just 3 minutes. It shows skills gaps, automation exposure, and where future-ready capabilities already exist within your business. No data upload, no preparation, just clarity for the future of your organisation. Visit abodu.com/global skills podcast. Now, back to the episode.
I know I shared with you, and I think it's actually worth asking you about this. It's not an isolated incident, because I know a lot of the listeners are business leaders. A particular company, we'll call it an SME, had a mandate in 2025 to really stop hiring. The recruiters and the heads of TA hoped 2026 would be, let's start hiring. We've worked out the skills gaps, the reskilling, upskilling. Unfortunately, the skills gaps have not been worked out, and now it's don't replace anyone that leaves, and they have fairly decent attrition. So you're looking at a company that's about to scale, but scale not with people. And I'm going to couple it with another scenario I was told in the US, where a company actually took the time to see the skills of their workforce and see who could become an AI skilled sort of manager to oversee the automation. And so some people who had come from customer service backgrounds have been upskilled in AI, and now they're highly in demand, this skilled worker. And I guess having run Cisco, you've worked in corporations, you know how they work, you know when the C-suite send down, make a cut for 8% of headcount, and you know how managers think. How should business leaders think today when either they're an SME and they feel, God, I should be making headcount cuts, or they're in a corporation and I should be making headcount cuts? And what role does skills play in that intersection?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously the 64,000 or 64 million or $64 trillion question, because the truth is, there isn't a kind of easy answer. Because obviously, a lot of people, when they stop hiring, for example, and let's take AI and all the kind of current challenge out of it, a lot of the time they stop hiring because, there are dynamics in the business. They can't see the growth, they can't see the opportunity. Their financial leaders are saying, we're spending too much cash, we're going to run out of cash, whatever it might be. So there's sort of real dynamics. And a lot of that is based on a kind of confidence factor. How does the business feel about the future? And if you genuinely can't see the growth in the way that you want it, and this is, again, outside the AI model, what do you do? And you have to, for responsible reasons, you have to shape the business to the size that you believe you can generally grow in. However, obviously there are circumstances where there is an opportunity to maybe do something different. And, that could be through things like automation or it could be by changing operating models or whatever it might be. But basically this sort of challenge of how do you shape a business to actually be sustainable, valuable, etc., all the things you're trying to achieve for the business. And I think, there's a lot of uncertainty with that at the moment. People are hearing kind of AI, job changes, and all that sort of stuff, that is causing uncertainty about what the future could be and about whether we can capitalize on it, saying, do we want to bring people on? What if those people don't need, have taken on some sort of long-term liability? Now, the reality is that we've got to be sensible about technology. Of course, AI is super powerful technology, but there are a lot of previous technologies that were super powerful as well. And they move from kind of consumers and individual using them into how is it embedded into a company is quite a big step. And despite what the tech industry will tell you, is quite a big step. All right. PCs, I remember back in the day when PCs first came around, people started buying them on their department budgets because, the green screen systems they had were okay. But, on the PC, they could do a spreadsheet and they could do a word processor and stuff. And it was like, great, this is amazing. It's so much more productive than using the mainframe system. And they would do it for all their kind of local stuff. Then they'd find that the PC crashed and they hadn't backed it up, or they couldn't connect the PC. All this great stuff they'd done on a spreadsheet didn't connect into the corporate system to actually get paid or do whatever it was they were trying to do. And so there was another big step of, okay, how do you take it from that world into the corporate world? And I think we've got to be conscious that that step is not quite as easy as might be painted by, the technology industry. Obviously, I'm a massive technophile myself. I love technology. I love AI. I love all the things it's doing. But I do recognize it's going to take some time to do things. So I think we have to recognize that when you're doing these kind of things, businesses have to make sensible discussions about making investments in new areas, getting people and others upskilled. The example you described of the company that was getting its people who were AI savvy to start to help shape other bits of the way that AI could be used in the company. That's a good investment, people who have got some AI capability. And I think as a nation and as companies, we need to sort of take ownership ourselves and go, right, how are we going to make people confident so they don't get scared off by AI, that they actually want to use it for something that you can create? They can be more productive in their job using AI or technology, and the company and hence the nation could be more productive and so on as well. So I think it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. Business leaders have to be balanced about the way they're doing this. And I think it's about investing in people and skills to allow them to then capitalize on the technology that's coming along. Because whatever people say, you're not suddenly going to have a bunch of AI just come in, you sack everybody you employ and it all just works. It doesn't work like that. Just never has and never will, probably.
You raise a good point there around the reskilling and upskilling. And the statistics where even when there's grants and government funding, business leaders, in many cases, they still don't take the jump and leap to access the funding. Would you know off your head, not to put you on the spot, and we can include links on the episode after, but if business leaders are listening today, where could they go to find out information on funding that's available in England for reskilling and upskilling for their employees?
Well, I mean, there's lots of clearly the world of apprenticeships has got lots of it. There's a thing called the Business Growth Service, which is a new service. It's sort of trying to consolidate information for smaller businesses, particularly, and when they want to grow and expand and export and do all those sorts of things. So there'll be a series of pointers within there. Obviously, Skills England and its capabilities in there are available again for people to see. And there's lots of stuff out there, probably regionally. I mean, regionally is clearly the way that most people, and again, if we take it sort of slightly, narrow it down to small business owners, you're a small business owner and you want to do something, you're probably going to look locally before you're going to look at some massive national scheme, which might have some connotations for you of being complicated and so on. So regionally and locally, most of the mayoral authorities and the other authorities have got skills-based programs, through their combined authority or mayoral authority or regional authority. So there's lots of stuff available, but it sort of identifies again this point you led with, which is, there's lots of stuff out there, but yet people are not using it. And I think it still comes down to this issue of complexity. I do think that it's very complex to get access to this stuff. And even when you look at a lot of government papers, you get, white papers that are published, and they're very comprehensive in what they're describing, but they've got loads of different, there's 1 million available for that, there's 10 million available for that, there's a regional fund available for this. It's hard. So that's where I do think that technology's got a part to play. I mean, the whole beauty of the idea of going from traditional search engine where you type in, what skills what training's available for me in Warwickshire, and I get, I don't know, hundreds, if not millions of replies. You probably only ever look at the first page, but anyway, you get a bunch of stuff there, but you've then got to go and decode it. The difference between that and going on to ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever and going, can you tell me about the local? And it says, yeah, actually, it's really interesting. Here's the sorts of things you could do. And it sort of synthesizes it into something in your language with an understanding of what you are. I mean, obviously, the whole beauty of the sort of scary thing, but the beauty of the large language models and the chatbots and so on is they start to get to know you and they go, actually, yeah, I know you're a small business that does whatever. Actually, you'd be really interested in the engineering stuff that's going on in Warwickshire. So that sort of level of technology curation, you could see a really great opportunity for that, because the truth of the small business world is exactly the same truth that technology companies have come to understand, and most companies have come to understand, which is serving a small business market is really hard. If you're a tech company and you're selling to, I don't know, 100 big businesses, is a lot easier than selling to 5.5 million small businesses. So first of all, the 100 big businesses will spend a lot more money. And then secondly, there's only 100 of them, as opposed to 5.5 million. So somehow or another, you have to build scaling models, and the scaling models are normally through channel programs or marketing programs or technology-led programs. And you can see that it would be great for anybody, including Skills England, to talk to every individual business But we can't do that. We can't do that. So somehow or another, we have to have some way through third parties or through technology or through, agents where we're actually having that dialogue on an ongoing basis. And that's super important. But I do think it's a great opportunity. It really is.
It really is huge. We've touched a lot, obviously, on education and skills. I'm from the hard sense, but I'd love to touch on human skills, because that's what's becoming more and more important. And I think not just as a country within the UK, but globally, we haven't really found clever ways of tracking human skills, measuring them, forecasting them, developing them even for kids in secondary schools. And I know that there's a big movement towards that. But I actually want to take it to your personal story because I'm very interested to know at what point in your career did that kind of ambition kick in? Because, you have to be pretty ambitious to get to the point of leading Cisco, doing triathlons, and now chair. When did that happen? And what were the...
Yeah, they call it ambition or complete madness.
But it
It's
was...
interesting. I actually did a TED talk a while ago or a TEDx talk on, this sort of, I think I called it the power of three, where I was talking about the sort of comparison between being a triathlete, internationally competing and being a chief exec of a company on the basis of kind of getting up there and thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Which was interesting. But I don't know. It's a very interesting question about ambition and motivation and so on, because, lots of people, and particularly young people, say to me, what should I do and how could I, and should I plan my life over the next 5 to 10 years? And I often say to them, what, if you can do that and you've got the insight or capability, then good on you. But most people didn't go down that path, I think. Most people kind of fell into what they were doing, either because some of their natural talents appeared or they were in a curious person or whatever, and they kind of got into this. Now, that maybe reinforces your point that these fundamental skills are actually what you want. And it is interesting because when I talk to lots of sectors now, they will definitely talk about what you might call sector skills. So if we're talking to the construction industry, they clearly want plumbers and carpenters and bricklayers and so on. Super important. But they also want people who are curious, know how to turn up for work, have got a bit of enthusiasm, maybe even have a bit of digital or other sort of knowledge. They have other attributes to them. And so, but without sort of chucking it all away, because you could sort of argue that when I started work, I clearly didn't know anything about computers. In fact, computers were pretty new. I certainly wasn't an expert in coding or nothing. But maybe the graduate model of those days was, we know you've been to uni, we know you've kind of managed to get through and get a degree. Therefore, you've got some basic capabilities. Now we're going to train you in what we really want you to do. So there's a bit of an argument that says, is it really about giving people the fundamental skills so that when they join a company or organization, that they're able to then become that person? But everybody's different. And to the point you made earlier, you've got different people with different skills. You've got people from different ethnic groups. You have people who have had very different social upbringings. Clearly, we've got a massive challenge in the UK on young people, 1 million young people not in education, employment or training. I would probably bet that most of those kids are as bright or as capable as my kids, but they just haven't been given the opportunity and the environment to get the jobs that they want to get. So somewhere or another, part of what we need to do is to provide the environment and the solution, but also we need to try and help people with some of the fundamentals that maybe I got through whatever past I had and they didn't. One of the things, for example, just as a slightly lateral thing, I've been involved, I've always played in bands and things since I was young. I learned the guitar when I was about, I don't know, 9 or 10 or something. And of course, I was happy to stand up in front of people and sing and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying that's what I do now. Well, I do occasionally, but it gave me a sort of confidence, if you will, to be able to perform in the broadest sense of the word. And, maybe we do need to, I know the creative sector are very keen for people to recognize this sort of essence of, performance and creativity and so on are vital. But it's hard, because what you're trying to do is to get people who have got all of the things you want, and then you can point them anything. I used to find that when I was running Cisco, I had some people work for me, but frankly, I could have given them any job. They were running HR and I could have said, you know what, go and run sales. And they would have done a great job on it because they've just got the capabilities. But how do you encapsulate those and give people a chance? And I think a lot of it's this confidence. We've got to give people confidence to, how they behave, how they learn, curiosity and so on, but without chucking away any vocational training and just going, yeah, or any sectoral training and just saying, we need people to get these basic skills and then get into work and maybe get some sectoral stuff. maybe that is where we're going. Maybe the whole apprenticeship thing is about saying we just need to bring people in, give them a foundation apprenticeship, which gives them some of the fundamentals, then get them into vocational training where they start to get sectoral skills, but really they're bringing their own core skills forward. Hard, but every sector I talk to says the same thing. We need people who are curious and confident and collaborative and so on, which is true.
I think you've just nailed it, Phil, because if you think about it, it's the first time ever. If truly AI is heading in a direction that it could do any hard skill, and some, I know it can do some soft skills, then surely now it's the time to really be developing, assessing human skills and matching with AI and more education. We could really help those 1 million kids that are currently not learning, not working, find their path with the right guidance.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, because it's really hard otherwise, because even if you just took that group itself of 1 million young people, one, it's a super complex group. It's not just all kids of the same nature and age or whatever. They're all different and they've all got their own, skills and capabilities and fears and hopes and whatever. And I mean, honestly, the best way to do it would be to give every single one of them a one-on-one kind of support package. And the third sector will do some of that, and maybe the education sector could, in theory, do some of that as well. But obviously, given these kids are not in that environment, that's hard. So how do you do that? And some blend of smart people with kind of assistance, if you will, maybe that's AI or other assistance could potentially do that. But you're always reluctant as well to just kind of go, it's a bit like when you say to somebody, it's on the web. It's like, thanks, I'd rather would have a conversation with you. So there's some blend we've got to find. Now, I think AI, to your point, could bridge that a bit because it's not a straightforward go and look at it and synthesize it yourself. It's someone chatting to you in the broadest sense, or it's a language, it's something that gets to know you and understands you and so on. We have to be careful of it, obviously, but yeah, it's clearly an opportunity, I think.
We have a closing tradition to the interview where I ask you two questions, but you only have to answer one or both. It's your call. Have you got a skill that you developed when you were young that you don't use as much or anymore that you'd like to? And for young people or even mid career unemployed listening in today, is there any advice you'd give them as to what they could do to really boost their chances?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say that one of the fundamental things which I do use, but I could use a lot better and others, share is communication. I mean, this format we're in today is a great example now of people grasping for a way of having a slightly deeper conversation. And we've only scratched the surface. I mean, we could do 10 podcasts basically based on this stuff because there's so much to talk about, and I probably talk too much. But there is something about communication which is really important. And that doesn't mean that, again, to your young person, that they have to be the best speaker or writer or presenter or whatever. It just means think about how you communicate. Because if you don't communicate, then it's very difficult to make any headway. And communication, it's a very personal thing, and obviously people have a lot of nervousness about it and so on as well. But if it's one skill that you could kind of develop, then I think it's powerful. And that might just mean talking to someone. It might mean, it might mean writing something down if that's the way you do it, or recording something if you're a Generation Alpha or whatever. But somehow or another, communicating who you are, what you want, what you can do is very powerful because you've also got to recognize that you're in a world where the people who are receiving that communication are overwhelmed with stuff. There's too much, there's noise and things. So cutting through and making an impact or letting people understand who you are is really powerful. And I think practicing that, getting some support on it is really powerful for anybody. And I think the people who are the best communicators, make most headway in many cases. You can see that with kids who are given the support to do it, to be confident and so on, they can make a lot of headway. And kids who are not given that support struggle with it. They struggle to make an impact despite how great they are. We need to give them the aspiration that they want to genuinely be able to communicate. So communication, I probably do, but I probably could do a lot more of it. And I think it's probably the one thing that I think if people could practice, engage with, understand, get help with would be super powerful.
I was expecting you to tell me as well you want to pick up the guitar more often too.
I do want to pick up a guitar more often. In fact, I've just signed myself up for a kind of country picking I love, play all sorts of music, but I just signed myself up as a New Year thing. I thought, right, I'm doing a year subscription to sort of country music picking thing. So I'm doing a bit of remembering some of that stuff. I used to play in a country band years ago, but I've forgotten most of it.
Well, Phil, thank you so much. I mean, I knew this interview was going to be more human than, a typical maybe government podcast might be. And I've really enjoyed it because for me, it doesn't matter if you're a business leader or a young person or you're unemployed and mid-career. I just think you've given a bit of hope. And I know Skills England is not there yet. It's a work in progress. But I would highly recommend if people can subscribe to just keep in touch and watch the progress because I have no doubt as you connect the dots with your team, it will absolutely thrive and the skills gap will truly be closed in the UK. So just
Thanks,
thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Vanessa, for the opportunity. Much appreciated. And, really keen to keep connecting.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, remember to subscribe so you never miss what's next. And for early access to new episodes, first invites to events, and a chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com because the future of skills belongs to all of us.